Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, who's stealing Nigeria's oil? Africa's richest economy faces its worst oil crisis in years as criminal gangs make off with billions in stolen crude. We find out how they launder their money and who's buying their stolen oil. Also this week, Iraq, a new government in place, but can it take back territory lost to Islamic State? And is it, and its Kurdish neighbours in the north, well armed enough to do the job? We'll show you who gets what arms and hardware and from where. And cutting through the technology hype as smartphones and online games become the must-have items. Oil. It drives people to all sorts of lengths, doesn't it? And as you'll see this week in Nigeria, theft is the big issue right now, which is no small matter for a country which gets almost 2/3 of its revenue from the oil industry. Nigeria has always been dogged by claims of oil-related corruption and transparency issues and environmental damage, but theft of oil is taking it to another level, and a level where a lot of control is lost. Look at this. Nigeria was producing 2.25 million barrels of oil per day, but around 400,000 barrels of those are stolen. That means the government lost $8 billion in revenue last year. And worse yet, the independent think tank Chatham House believes money's even being laundered through international banks. The whole process is as fascinating as it is troubling. Stolen oil on-sold to Asia and Latin America and the US, with dirty profits for the criminals and, some would say, corrupt figures within government and industry. But it all starts with the theft. Raoyirage with this special report now as she joins the Nigerian task force trying to turn off the taps.
Setting off at the break of dawn, these men are on a mission in the Niger Delta, part of a force drawn from various security agencies and civilians tasked with curbing oil theft. An hour into their patrol in southern Ijaw, they arrest suspects and order them to reveal the location of their illegal business. They make their way from the open creek into the thick mangrove. They strike gold. This is where stolen crude is refined. They destroy the site and set it on fire. We have to move back. It's a dangerous business. Explosions could happen at any moment, and the fire can extend miles over the water. Within seconds, the area is engulfed in darkness.
This is where they are doing their bunkering. Now, as you can see that everywhere is smoking. Burning their camps, they have surrendered.
Despite these efforts, oil theft in Nigeria is at its highest levels in 5 years, since the government gave amnesty to former rebels in the area. The government says $8 billion in revenue were lost to industrial-scale theft last year, and multinational oil giants have started reducing their onshore presence here, selling off fields as a result of the theft. Tucked in the forest, we find these men cooking oil, as it's called here. Their site had been destroyed before, but they came back.
There is nothing we do for a living. This is our only source of wealth that we do and eat. Without this thing, we can't survive.
On a good day, these workers at one end of a vast organized crime chain can make $200. The oil pipelines crisscross their community. The poverty of those living around the source of Nigeria's wealth is bare to see.
The majority of the stolen crude does not get refined here in the Niger Delta. Larger bunkering operations involve transferring the crude to barges. The barges then take it to larger tankers in the Atlantic Ocean, and from there to buyers in West Africa, Europe, Latin America, and as far as Asia.
Activists monitoring the industry say connected individuals and security personnel are involved.
Those who ought to have protected the pipelines, those who ought to have helped the Nigerian economy are now participants in the subject matter. High-placed politicians at Abuja, at the local end, are participating in the business.
Despite low-level arrests, there have been no serious large-scale prosecutions. Until those at the helm of this illegal trade are held to account, Nigeria's riches will keep burning away.
Well, there are not many people better placed to talk about the economic impact of all this than our next guest. In Abuja is Mutiu Sunmonu, who is the chairman of Shell Nigeria. Mr. Sunmonu, thank you so much for your time. Shell has been in Nigeria, I believe, for around 40 years. For how much of that time has oil theft been a problem?
Well, I think the whole issue of crude oil theft, I must say, is a national tragedy. It is a problem that has been with us for quite a while, actually. I'm sure this is a problem that has been with us for more than a decade. And so it has been there for such a long time, even before this present administration came to power.
So tell me then how you respond to, well, we've got reports from places like Chatham House and just wider accusations that people within the industry can actually benefit from all this, that there is such a level of corruption that industry players can benefit from what you described in your last answer as a national tragedy.
I think that is not true. I think this is really a lack of understanding of the modalities of operations. Let me state clearly, as an industry leader, we benefit more by putting our oil in the pipeline and getting them to customers rather than spilling it. So I do not see any logic that the industry is benefiting from crude oil theft at all. If anything, this is something that causes us a lot of pain because we, on our part, have had to introduce a number of operational measures to curtail this. Every day, we do helicopter overflights just to make sure we can quickly identify where crude oil theft is taking place or about to take place. We are spending huge amount of money on surveillance. We are exploring all sorts of technology options to make crude oil theft a harder business.
Okay, so if you're doing all those things and taking all those precautions that you tell us about, the things like the helicopter overflights to try to find out what's going wrong, why is it all still happening? Where's the breakdown that's allowing this to go on?
Well, I must say, I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So we must not underestimate the resolve of the perpetrators of this act too. So we need to understand that this is not going to be a quick fix at all because of the huge amount of money that is at stake. And I think if we are able to get a good handle on the enforcement of law and order, if we are able to get a good handle on youth employment in the Delta, and we can promote a lot of education about the negative effect of crude oil theft, then we'll be getting close to a reasonable position, in my view. But it is going to be quite a long haul.
So we've very much been talking about the problems at one end here, and that is the theft of the oil. The other problem is that this oil, which is stolen, gets on-sold. Can you tell us more of that? Because I'm trying to understand here how, or I guess who would really buy this dirty oil, which they know isn't legitimate, and is there a way to stop the process at that end, I guess, the on-selling of it?
Well, certainly we do believe that the reason the question of crude oil theft continues to be with us is because there is still a market out there. I have always maintained that the greater proportion of the oil that is stolen actually is being stolen in overseas market. And we believe that technologies do exist to be able to trace stolen oil, but you can't just base your solution on technology alone. Mm-hmm. What is even far more important is international collaboration across boundaries. Collaboration by governments, setting up a monitoring team and enforcing the protocol for checking the DNA, as it were, of oil in the refinery to be able to identify what is stolen. So this is going to be a very huge undertaking, and it will require significant political will by international government.
And just on a final brief note, Mr. Sunmonru, do you feel that you're getting that political will? Do you feel that the authorities in Nigeria, in Africa, are responding enough and understanding that this is a big deal?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I can tell you that I have been at least 2 different fora, which was actually chaired by Mr. President, again, listening to stakeholders on how to fight crude oil theft. What is actually required is continuity and stepping it up again to ensure that it can become a much more difficult business for crude oil thieves.
Mutiu Sunmonru, the chair of Shell in Nigeria, we thank you so much for joining us. And further to Raoya's report, which you saw a little bit earlier, do have a look at her Twitter page. At Raoya is where you'll find her plenty more information and pictures from her trip out with the Nigerian task force dealing with this issue of oil theft in Nigeria. And still ahead on Counting the Cost, all the news from a big week in technology, including the video game which looks like a movie and is attracting Hollywood-like money. Destiny is coming later in the programme. A few weeks back, we reported on the rise of the Islamic State in Iraq, and we really focused on the group itself and where it was getting its funding from. Now Iraq's trying to fight back, we're doing the reverse. Who's arming the Iraqis, and in particular, the Kurds, who are so key to all of this? To attempt to stave off IS, some nations have pledged to arm the Kurds' Peshmerga forces. Surprisingly, Iran jumped in first with light arms and ammunition, no specific amounts there. Then we've got Germany. It pledged $91 million worth of weapons. Italy, about $2.5 million there worth of, and quite specific numbers here, 200 machine guns, 2,000 rocket-propelled grenades, almost 1 million rounds of ammunition, which is similar to what Britain is providing. And Canada, $15 million worth of non-lethal equipment. 10 million of that is helmets, body armour and logistical support. Then there's what the Iraqi army has been given, or not, as the case may be. Iran and Russia have handed over Su-25 Frogfoot attack jets, and it needs those because there's a delay in receiving warplanes and helicopters from the United States. Iraq's ordered 34 F-16 fighter jets. The first 4 won't arrive in Iraq until the end of the year. I should point out that these jets usually have limitations put on them by the Americans. They're not necessarily at full capacity. The US Congress has also opposed the sale of 24 AH-64E Apache attack helicopters, as well as 24 Beechcraft AT-6 Texan 11 armed turboprop planes. Now, even if you're not some sort of plane spotter who knows what all those letters and numbers mean, you can see how significant these would all be to the Iraqi cause. Meanwhile, the US has jumped in with President Obama laying out his plans. And for the first time, he went into some detail about taking the fight from Iraq into Syria.
Our objective is clear. We will degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL through a comprehensive and sustained counterterrorism strategy. It will not involve American combat troops fighting on foreign soil. This counterterrorism campaign will be waged through a steady, relentless effort to take out ISIL wherever they exist using our air power and our support for partners' forces on the ground.
So what we're trying to illustrate here is the very complex situation of who's arming who. And we're going to break that down with our next guest, Iraqi political and oil consultant Shuan Zulal from Carducci Consulting in London. Let's start with the very acute issues to do with IS, Islamic State. Just explain to our viewers how important the Kurds are to Baghdad in this battle.
Well, the Kurds have proven to be key in fighting ISIS because yes, they had some setbacks in Sinjar and a few other areas. It was partly because lack of equipment and lack of morale and because of lack of money. But the Iraqi army completely melted away from the northern part of Iraq. Problem in Iraq is already Iraq has enough problem, but you push one problem down the way, you kick ISIS out of those areas, you end up with other problems of trying to control these strengthening militias in Iraq.
So where do the Kurds get their funding from? Well, actually, maybe not necessarily their funding, but their arms and their weapons. You know, we know about the Americans arming the Iraqi government, and we're going to talk about that more in a moment, but I'm interested in who is supplying the Kurds. Tell us more about that.
Well, historically, I mean, the Kurdish Peshmerga used to be freedom fighters and fighting against Saddam, so most of the arms come from capturing those arms, whether during the during the fight within Iraq up to 2003 or 2003 and afterwards, where they took over a lot of equipment from the Iraqi army. And you know, an army like that, it needs a lot of logistics and a lot of weaponry, which they don't have now. And even since the US and the other country have decided to arm the Kurds, the armament all goes through Baghdad now. It goes through the Baghdad airport. It gets to be checked and so on. And for political reason, the inspection has been delayed. There's been some armament has been withheld. So Peshmerga is really trying hard to you know, fight a war against ISIS, but then is fighting another political war with Baghdad to try to get all the aids and all the military equipment through. And plus, you have the regional players. Iran has been one of those countries who has been helpful to Peshmerga, providing the ammunitions and so on. Turkey hasn't, and Turkey is still vehemently against arming Peshmerga forces by the outside countries like the US and so on. But Iran, surprisingly, has been very helpful, and they, because the threat of ISIS obviously for Iran is much more greater, and they're much more worried about ISIS. So Iran has been one of those countries, one of the first countries to aid Peshmerga forces.
Which leads me on to funding the Iraqis, and I just want to focus on the United States here. It supplies arms, we know that. It talks about always backing the Iraqis, standing shoulder to shoulder with them, we know that. But then I read about these F-16s, which it does supply, and they're compromised, they're limited in how far they can go. Just give us your view on the way the US arms Iraq.
Well, the US since 2011 has been in a dilemma how to arm Baghdad, but because of, I mean, I almost go as far as saying a rogue prime minister, the one who just left office, his actions hasn't really been given a lot of confidence to US policymakers to sell arms to Baghdad. And although F-16s fighters were supposed to be delivered about a year ago, and they still haven't. I think there's a couple being delivered, but the problem with those fighters, you need capability to be able to use them. You can't bring US pilots to fly them, so you need Iraqi pilots. And all the pilots who have been trained to fly these jets, they're still in very early training programs, and they're not combat ready. So what you have a sort of a battle between the White House and the Congress and the Senate. So they're trying to block since January this saga has been ongoing, because basically the Congress were not happy about the way the last Prime Minister was heading, and they're worried about how this weapon is going to be used, whether it's going to be used on Iraqi people rather than to defend Iraq. So I think it's down to Iraqi government and Iraqi politician to prove is worthy of being supplied this arm, and it's not going to be used against his own people, and it's going to be used to defend Iraqi borders rather than suppress minorities and so on.
And if we're talking about relationships like that, government relationships, and we're coming back to the Kurds here, the relationship between the Kurds and Baghdad is key, isn't it? I mean, they've only committed to the government for 3 months. How's that going to go?
Well, on a political level, the politician and Kurdish leadership has made a deal with the Iraqi politician and the Sunnis and the Shias. Obviously, the Shias are in charge now. But on the street level, I think there's a lot of discontent, and people are not sure why the Kurdish demand has not been, the issues that have not been resolved. For example, one of the most pressing issues has been the budget, because Iraqi government has not sent Kurdistan regional budget to pay civil servant salaries and so on for nearly 9 months now. I think the sentiment is positive, but with caution, and the 3 months maybe not long enough because the issues are very deep. It's not only the budget, there's the oil issue, there's the outstanding amount for the oil companies, plus the right of ownership of the oil and the exports and how the revenue is going to be shared in the future and so on. And these are very complicated and long-lasting disputes. It's not going to be resolved within 3 months, I doubt it.
That is Shwan Zulal talking Iraq and the Kurds with us this week, fighting IS. Thank you for your time, Shwan. We're going to finish up with a look at what's going on in the technology world, because there was a lot this past week. Apparently some company launched a new phone or something like that. We're going to look at that later though. First, Destiny, a science fiction tale set 700 years in the future in which armed protectors must defend the last civilized place on our precious Earth. What you're looking at is actually a video game, and it is pretty much the biggest thing in that field right now. Destiny attracted name actors like Peter Dinklage and Bill Nighy as character voices. Sir Paul McCartney wrote some of the music, and on its first day, $500 million worth of the game was shipped out to retailers, making it the biggest game launch in history. Not bad for the game's publisher, Activision. And the better news is that because it's an online game, its growth potential is massive. And then at the other end of the spectrum, this game called Minecraft. It's blocky, it's pixely, nothing like the fancy graphics we saw. And yet Microsoft wants to pay $2 billion for it. It's already been a success for its current Swedish owners, Mojang, which had revenues of $360 million last year. What Microsoft wants is to get what is a very popular game operating on its Windows 8 platform, as well as Windows phones and Surface tablets. And then there's Apple. Finally got into the wearables game with the Apple Watch and launched 2 new bigger versions of the iPhone as well. Apple fans all over the world were impressed, of course, but it does need to be said that these new products are really nothing new. Samsung Galaxy, HTC, Huawei, they've all been making large-screen smartphones for years, and we're keen to ram that point home after the Apple event. Have a look at HTC on its UK Twitter page, which adopted, shall we say, a slightly sarcastic tone, saying it was happy to congratulate Apple on joining the world of big screens. While Samsung Mobile put out a bunch of tweets and videos using the phrase, "It doesn't take a genius to see." That is a reference to the blue t-shirt wearing geniuses, as Apple calls them, those who provide tech support at Apple stores. What was maybe more significant was Apple's move into mobile payment. Again, not new, but Apple's size and reach can quite possibly turn this into something much bigger than it already is. Here's Jake Ward to explain more.
Perhaps the most notable new feature is NFC, or Near Field Communications. It sends private data via radio waves using little or no power across a distance of about 2 inches. It's great for authentication. One user painted an NFC chip into her fingernail lacquer as an extra passcode for her phone. Another guy built a system that lets NFC start his car. But Apple's plan seems to be to use NFC to turn the phone into an extension of your wallet.
Apple's getting a lot of attention about NFC, but the thing is, it's been in development since 2004, and in fact, it's been in the built landscape for a while. Since 2011, in fact, you could pay for parking at any of 30,000 parking meters here in San Francisco using an NFC-enabled smartphone. So it's not as if Apple's killing everybody, way out ahead of the competition on this one.
NFC matters in this case, however, because Apple has more credit card information on file than Amazon and eBay combined, thanks to iTunes and the App Store. So if you've ever bought anything through either one on an iPhone, you're going to be ready to use the new iPhone to make purchases. But the use of that technology also brings up questions of trust. People already use their phones to hold all kinds of intimate stuff, including photographs of their kids and, well, romantic moments. The rise of an NFC-enabled smartphone is going to centralize even more of your personal information, in this case your credit cards, into the phone and make it accessible to the physical environment and hackers around you.
Due to the proximity, hacking becomes very difficult, as well as the fact that it's up to industry standard encryption. And Apple's been working with the credit card companies to make sure that everyone's comfortable with what they're going to be releasing.
Apple is moving more and more of your life into their products, and now almost any transaction you might make with cash, a soda, a pack of gum, a half tank of gas, will be yet another thing you'll have to trust Apple to protect.
And just finally, the change which Apple didn't make a big deal about, but for the tech geeks and the audiophiles among us, it is a sad passing. Back in 2004, I bought this, an iPod. It plays music. It does nothing else. But 10 years ago, it was kind of like an iPhone. It was the new cool gadget that people really coveted, because with this hard drive-based device, you could have your whole music collection in your pocket if you wanted. Of course, technology's raced on since then. Hard drives have been replaced by smaller, faster flash drives. The click wheel interface has got nothing on a touchscreen, and so iPod, in this form at least, just doesn't have a place anymore. It's sad because this beautifully designed product was actually the thing which saved Apple back in 2001. It really wasn't competing with traditional PCs, and Apples and Macs were out of the mainstream. But it spotted a gap in the portable music market and pretty much changed it, and the company, forever. I'll admit, I haven't used my iPod in years, but nostalgia means I haven't gotten rid of it either. That is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/programs. The Counting the Cost page has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. There's also the social media feed down the side for people's comments and feedback, which you can join by tweeting either me at KamalAJE or our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, and do use the hashtag Counting the Cost when you do, or just drop us an old-fashioned email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.